want to make a video today talking about taking tests because over the years I've kind of developed a bunch of strategies for how to take tests effectively, how to study for them, how to take them, and how to grow from maybe some negative results. And I want to talk about that today because I think right now with people taking tests, it's kind of midterm season right now, you don't have a whole lot of advice from teachers or peers or anything like that. And so I think it's pretty easy to get lost right now. So I wanted to share with you some of my best advice that I've picked up on in the hopes of helping a few of you out. But first, let's hear from our sponsor. I'd now like to thank Grammarly for sponsoring this video. Grammarly is a digital writing assistant that I have used for years. Getting started with Grammarly is really easy. You just download the browser extension, install it, create a free account, and you are good to go. The free version of Grammarly is great. It gives you basic spelling and writing suggestions, but a few years ago I actually upgraded to Grammarly Premium, and I decided to pay because the features that it offers me are really useful in my day-to-day life. For example, Grammarly Premium offers vocabulary suggestions. So if you're like me and you tend to use the same types of words over and over in a body of text, or you use generally basic words, Grammarly Premium will notify you and suggest alternative words that preserve the meaning of your text but make it more exciting to read. Grammarly Premium also has clarity suggestions, so if you write these long, convoluted sentences, as we all fall into the trap of doing, especially when writing essays that we're still working out in our heads, then Grammarly Premium will suggest how you might make that more concise. Another awesome Grammarly Premium feature is the plagiarism detector. So if you're writing an essay and you want to be sure that you've cited all the material that you've used, but you're not sure if you did, then within the Grammarly editor, you can compare your work against billions of pages on the internet. And if it finds that there's work left uncited that's a direct quote from someone else, then you can remedy that error and you can cite it properly. So like I said, I've been using Grammarly Premium for a really long time now, and I really recommend it. And if you want to get started, then you can go to grammarly.com/johnfish, where you can sign up for a free account and get 20% off Grammarly Premium. First, I'm going to talk about what I recommend doing before the test. And really, number one is pretty simple, but has been pretty difficult even for me this year. Show up to class. Don't fall into the trap that I've fallen into a few times this year of, I'll catch up on lectures later. I'll watch them on the weekend or whatever. You probably won't, and then you'll end up having to binge a bunch of them and catch up on a bunch of lecture content all at once. It's not a fun time, trust me. The best way to really get engaged in your course is to show up to class and take notes and ask questions when you don't understand things. If it's an asynchronous class, it's recorded. There are message boards usually. So finding out ways to ask questions, to engage in the lecture content in real time, to take notes for strategy, really important. Now, let's assume that you've done all that, or you're at a point where it's useless advice because the test is, in a week or in a few days or tomorrow. How do I actually study for a test? So the first thing that I do for any class is I make a summary of the course. And making the summary actually constitutes most of my study. And I'll explain how I do it. So the first thing that I do is I get all of the notes together for all the lectures being covered in the course. And at the same time, I will get a couple of blank sheets of paper and I'll go through the lectures one by one and I'll just pull out the main ideas. So extracting those main ideas and putting them onto one sheet of paper all together gives you a really brief summary of the course. Usually I can put one course on kind of front and back of a piece of paper, maybe two pieces of paper if it's a heavy course. It's never been more than that in my 3 years of college so far. So why do this? Well, the first reason is that it forces you to engage with the material at a deeper level than just reading your notes and hoping that you remember them. By having to actively go over the material and say, oh yeah, what were we trying to do here? Like, what was the big idea? What did we get out of that? And then putting that on paper in a concise manner, it allows you to really pull this kind of narrative that the class is telling, because every class tries to tell a story. Whatever that story might be, you have to pick out the main events. And if you can figure out those main events, your life on the test becomes a whole lot easier because you start to relate questions to those events. Because every question is trying to test a concept. So if you're learning a bunch of concepts in math, you can look at a question and say, what concept does that relate to? And if you know all the concepts, then you can generally figure out what direction to go in. And the details, and I'll come back to this a bunch, the details are usually the easiest thing to fill in once you have the big idea. So the next thing that I do when I have my study guide is I start to try to explain every concept out loud, or in my head, but as if I'm explaining it out loud. I'm just trying to explain the concept as it intuitively makes sense. And if I don't have an intuition for it, well, that means that I don't really understand it very well, and that's when I dive into the material again. So at this point, I'll look at original course material. So I'll look at if there's lecture videos, if there are lecture notes, I have my notes, and maybe a textbook, right? And I'll try and figure out what it is that I'm missing in my intuition. What is it that I'm struggling to explain? And once you've filled in those gaps, suddenly you realize that you understand the concepts a lot better. If you're able to explain them at a low level, you'll be able to fill in the details later because you really do truly understand the concept, and now it's stuck in your brain because you know it well enough to explain it. And you can imagine if you can do that for every main concept, every main idea in the course, then really you have a mastery of the material. And all that's left is to fill in the details. You just have to be able to do the algebra, you have to be able to, write the essay. But if you have the main themes, the main ideas, that is 80, 90% plus of what the course is actually trying to get across. The rest is kind of just the fluff on top. So when I say that this strategy, making this study guide and explaining this study guide, it takes up most of my studying, it's probably 80 to 90%. The only other thing that I'll really do is if there are practice tests that are given or there are practice questions that are posted, I might do some of them if I have time. But again, I don't worry too much about the details, right? It's important to do maybe a few questions, just, get the gears flowing. You got to make sure, you're not messing up numbers too bad or whatever. But I find a lot of people waste so much time doing things that they know that they can do. And that's not really studying, right? Like if you have a calculus course and you're spending 80% of your time just doing algebra, just crunching numbers, evaluating functions, that's not really efficient studying, right? What you're really trying to do is, okay, can I set the limits on my integrals correctly? Right? Or can I take derivatives properly or antiderivatives or whatever? And the rest is kind of fill in the blanks, trust yourself that you can do it. That stuff is important, it counts for something, I'm not trying to discount it, but it's not as important as people make it. People kind of get it flipped. They spend 80% of their time working on what counts for ultimately probably 10% of their grade. And so that's pretty much how I study for every test now, and it's proven to be a really effective model, both in terms of time efficiency for me, but also results. I tend to do pretty well on tests where I actually apply this strategy in its totality. Okay, so with studying done then, what are the things that I do when taking a test? Well, first of all, what I'll recommend, come up with a list of the things that you need in your environment in order to take the test. So for example, some of my tests that I was taking a theoretical comp sci class that we were doing on paper. So I needed to have a printer that was working and a scanner that was working. Now, you don't want to figure out on test day that your printer is not working or your scanner is not working. So doing a little dry run beforehand, just come up with a list of the things that you need to do, and then just making sure that there are no obstacles in your way, and if there are, that you've resolved them before taking the test. Now, this is where we get kind of more into the online school stuff. There are a few little things that I'd recommend in particular for online school. One is be really aware of notifications and distractions. Your devices are built to distract you, right? Like they're built for this multitasking, notification-oriented workflow. That's not taking a test. A test is a single workflow. You are working on this one thing, hyper-focused on it. And so figure out how to get your computer out of that mode. Get that ready beforehand. Know what you're gonna do beforehand on your devices. So your phone as well, right? Put it in airplane mode. Figure out how to eliminate all of these digital distractions, because trust me, they will mess with you. Another thing with online test taking, you probably don't have a teacher telling you when you have half the time gone or 10 minutes left or anything like that. It's all on you. So figure out how you're going to keep track of time and use that to know when you need to move on. So if you're getting stuck on a question and you know that you're running out of time, it's much better to write down all of the big ideas for all of the questions rather than kind of diving really deep in on a few questions and leaving some other questions blank. It's just not really going to be efficient in terms of getting your grade. Because again, 80% of your grade probably is concentrated in Did you get the big idea? Did you make good direction? And the rest of that's going to be the execution of that idea. And finally, just be aware of any kind of extra logistical constraints that your school or your teacher is placing on you. If it's a proctored exam, make sure that you have a webcam and everything set up. Make sure your background's all good. You're not going to get interrupted by your family. If you have to scan your results, make sure you leave time at the end to scan your results. So on and so forth. Just be aware of those things and honestly make a list, write it out. It literally can't hurt you, and it could save you if one of those things slips your mind and suddenly you get a 0 on the test as a result. Okay, so finally, I want to give you some advice for what happens if you do poorly on a test. I don't really think that you need advice for what happens if you do well on a test, because just keep doing what you're doing. But what happens if things didn't go well, if you got a grade that you didn't like? Well, first of all, it is not the end of the world. I'll tell you a couple stories about some bad grades that I've gotten. So sophomore year of college, I was taking a statistics course, and I was doing pretty well. On the first midterm, I got like a 95. I was really enjoying the course, really engaged in the content. And then I went through a bad breakup, and my head just went to another planet. And I was not going to class really for a couple of weeks. They were recorded, so I was like, oh, I'll just watch the recordings. I didn't watch them. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't taking care of myself. My mental health was really low. And I kind of bombed the second midterm. I got like a 60, maybe a 65 max. And so there's like a 35% decline from the first midterm. Now, in that moment that I got that test back and I'm reflecting on it, if I was beating myself up about it, what purpose would that have served? The fact of the matter is, you don't go to school in a vacuum. Real life happens. Sometimes it sucks. And that'll affect your school performance. Now, that's not to say that you should go and create excuses ahead of time for, oh, this is why I'm not going to do well on this test, and this is why, this is why I can't do this, and this is why I can't do that. Oh, woe is me. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is be fair to yourself. And I always try and take myself out of it and think about, what if I was watching my friend and they went through a rough breakup and they didn't do well in a midterm? Would I go to them and say, hey, you suck. You didn't work hard. You blew it. You need to reevaluate your life, Would I do any of that? Absolutely not. I would probably say, hey, I'm really sorry. Buy them an ice cream maybe, go for a walk, tell them I believe in them, right? Like, that's what friends do. So why would you treat yourself worse than you would treat a friend? It doesn't make any sense. And you treat your friends like that because you want to see them succeed. So if you're treating yourself worse, is that because you don't want to see yourself succeed? It's just a self-defeating attitude. So be fair to yourself, but be honest. Another time I got a pretty rough grade, first year of high school, the very first test of high school math actually, I got a 77. And this was coming in, I was a grade ahead in math. So I was supposed to be this, smart kid taking a year up, and I got one of the worst grades in the class. It was not supposed to be a hard test. I think the average was mid-90s probably. I got a 77, it was factoring. Being honest with myself, I didn't study. I didn't work hard. Everything had kind of just been handed to me up to that point. I'd never really needed to study for a test in middle school. Things that just, come naturally. So as soon as there was a test that didn't come naturally, I didn't do well. So I needed to start to learn how to study. I needed to work on it, and I did. I started to dive into those things, and I did well in the course overall. Point being that just because you're being fair to yourself and you're allowing some wiggle room for real life to play its role, doesn't mean that you can't be honest with yourself when you're not working hard, when you're not studying, when you're not living up to the potential that you think you can. So my biggest advice for reflecting on a negative result is to be honest but fair. And it doesn't make sense to beat yourself up either way, right? That won't move you anywhere. It's all about just growing from where you are right now. If you made a mistake, if life got in the way, just focus on controlling what you can control and trusting that everything else is going to fall into place. And it will. Okay, so that is my advice for online test taking and test taking in general. Hopefully it was useful to you. Hopefully you got something out of it. And if you did, feel free to subscribe. I really appreciate it. I appreciate every one of you for lending me some of your time. It really means the world to me. So hope you're doing well. Hope you're taking care of yourself out there. Be good.